The crypto market continues to just chop sideways while we await a US and China trade deal. However, there's a few key things that we are watching while we await the dust to settle around this trade deal. But first, let's start off with a few things. Number one, the market itself. So when it comes to the market in the last 24 hours, really not a lot has happened. Most of the market is still pretty boring. There's a few outliers, sure. On the week, we're still in the deep red. This is going to take a little bit of time to bounce back from. In terms of Bitcoin, again, Bitcoin, no real major change at all. Still hovering around 111K. Ethereum, slightly above 4K. Nothing too crazy there. And then, yes, XRP still around $2 and almost 50 cents. Again, during this time, it's going to take a bit to get back to some of these previous highs. When it comes to the actual market cap of crypto, this is what the total looks like. So recently we did hit that upper, blue zone. This is where we really look at major rejections. We got our high here on the 13th, which was of course Monday, and then we just sold off. And right now we're still trading around 3.74 trillion. We are still in an uptrend at this moment. However, the biggest thing to focus on here when it comes to the total is maintaining this uptrend and starting to flip some key levels. The first major one that I'm looking at here is 3.92 trillion. Main reason why we are looking at this is because this is the high going back to July. After that's flipped, we look at the August high, and then we also look at the October high. But again, like I said, there's a lot of resistance for us to get through on the total. Very similar to Bitcoin, very similar to XRP. So, until we start to really make some significant moves across the board on some of those other altcoin charts and even, Bitcoin, this chart is probably just going to continue to chop sideways. Now, while this is happening, we are also seeing the fear and greed index also chopping. This is around 37. We are still in fearful levels. The question here is, do we have an additional push to the downside to get us back into extreme fear? Well, a lot of people have been watching a few whales, specifically the whale that did short the market right before Friday's crash. He has been shorting the market again. A lot of people are expecting the market to have that much larger sell-off. I just feel like a lot of these things are kind of like psyops in the space. Like, for example, James Wynn, whenever he was shorting the market, everyone was so panicked, and then all of a sudden he blew his entire portfolio just leverage trading. So again, when it comes to a lot of these things, I feel like they're just psyops to distract us, to get fearful, to, kind of keep a close eye on the market when it comes to some of these major moves. And then, we also try to do the right thing, time in the market, following these individuals, and then all of a sudden we just get completely screwed. So I don't really care to watch some of these big whales and what they're doing in this space. Yes, following the money is definitely a big one, but I mainly look at spot buys rather than leverage trading, because again, you never know when those leverage positions are going to close out, whenever they're going to get liquidated. I mean, typically we do see them on chain if they do get liquidated, but sometimes you don't even know when they're going to close those positions, and we could just keep holding positions that are in leverage, waiting for something to happen, and all of a sudden we get liquidated. So again, the main thing that we're focused on here is the facts, which in front of us, we have the facts. We know that some of these key levels need to be flipped. Until then, we're just going to chop. We're just going to be in very boring price action levels. So we're watching this closely when it comes to the total. When it comes to Bitcoin, again, the main thing here is maintaining that uptrend. So far, we have been. I'm watching the daily candle close today. Right now, currently, we are about 8 hours away from this daily candle close. RSI-wise, we're still in this uptrend. I'm watching for a big bounce on this chart. The next big bounce on this chart, though, if we fail to break over 115.4K-ish roughly, it's not going to look good. We need to push above this, and I would argue that the full outlook here would be flipping the levels going all the way back here to like mid-September. So a big break above 117.9K, we could just round it up to 118K. Flipping that will be a huge moment for Bitcoin, because that will signal that we are going to go back to these all-time highs. But the main thing that I'm focused on is just maintaining this uptrend, because I understand that right now we're not in bullish structure, right? Especially even if we're looking at like even the 4-hour, right? We still are not in bullish structure because it's just been nothing but lower highs. Yes, we have higher lows technically, but I want to see a little bit more out of Bitcoin. I'm not sold yet on Bitcoin being in a bullish structure just yet. So breaking a few key levels on this chart, getting a little bit more momentum on this chart as well, that's what we want to see. And until then, what I hate to break it to you, but a lot of altcoins, including of course XRP, are just not going to have that big bounce that we want. And when it comes to XRP, looking at this, we started to kind of chop a little bit. I know that the RSI here, I was looking at this more so on like the 4-hour, but when it comes to XRP on the daily, I do have the RSI midline here. I want to see us flip this midline because we just rejected it on the 13th. Also, when the market did reject as well. Currently, XRP has been hovering around this blue zone that I've outlined I think maybe it was like 2-3 weeks ago. I was talking about this $2.30 to $2.60 level being retested. We are currently just chopping in that. Now, are we going to bottom here? Are we going to, have a much larger move on XRP out of this range? Well, that's really all determined by what Bitcoin does next. I hate to say that we have to follow Bitcoin here, but we really need to watch what Bitcoin does next because it's the current driver of the cycle. Even though, Ethereum started to lead a bit, we're still now in that Bitcoin side of the market. And I think that that's also very noticeable by just looking at a few things like Bitcoin dominance, how it had that massive spike just recently. I mean, Bitcoin dominance on the chart, and I could just show you guys this real quick because it was extremely significant, the push to the upside. So this is what Bitcoin dominance looks like on the weekly. We had that massive spike to 60, almost 3.5%. Currently, we are in this blue zone. I'm expecting us to sell off from here, but until that happens and until Bitcoin really starts to push to the upside, charts like XRP are just not going to have a big move just yet. Now, any catalyst upcoming that could change that outlook? Yeah, sure. There's definitely a lot of things that could change that. But until we see those catalysts really affect price action, I'm not dead set on this thing having a massive move just yet until we start to see the dust settle with this US and China situation. But also the S&P did start to erase almost all of the recent losses. Today, we are finding some resistance around 6693, almost 6700 exact. And we're finding some resistance here. We could have a sell-off from this point because, again, this is acting as resistance. Main thing that I would be looking at is that midline holding up around 6600, very similar back to roughly the end of September. And then from that point, we should have a much larger push to a potential new all-time high on the S&P. Now, that will also correlate with what happens with the US and China. And for anyone that thinks that, all right, well, the US-China situation doesn't really matter, it definitely is a lot of noise. I would agree. However, the market has been following what Trump has been putting out very closely. The markets are extremely reactive to what Trump is saying, and we have it over here from the Kobayashi letter. Just for an example, here's proof of it. So on the 14th, so yesterday, the stock market just erased $450 billion in just 7 minutes because President Trump threatened to start producing cooking oil in the US. So any threat that we make to China, any move that we're making to go against China, the markets get terrified immediately. The markets are more reactive now to the trade war and tariff discussions than going back to the beginning of the year. And I think that the reason why is because everyone's looking at this time period on the chart and they're saying, well, the market sold off for, over 50 plus days. And, I don't want to, like, any situation that's happening now, like, for an example, this one, everyone's thinking, all right, well, we have 56 days or at least, another 2 months or so before we see any good news from this. So the markets are just going to sell off for another 56 days. And, that's going to take us into December. So nothing's going to happen until next year. Like, everyone has this mindset that essentially the markets are done until next year. Like I just read a comment the other day, I think it was either on X or on YouTube. Someone said, you know, I don't think that the markets are going to move or do anything until Q1 of 2026. I think that the markets right now are just so terrified of anything happening with this trade war and these tariff discussions because they have PTSD from what happened in the beginning of the year. So anything that Trump is saying now immediately affects the market. Now, we also know on the 12th that we got an update regarding Donald Trump and China. We have Trump softens his tone on China. Markets are rebounding. Crypto's catching the bid. After the biggest crypto wipeout in history, this kind of tone shift is exactly what traders wanted to hear. So this was on the 12th. So this was on Sunday. We already know how Monday went, and we already know how the markets are going right now. But essentially, this was Trump saying, hey, we don't want to, hurt China. China doesn't want to get hurt either. So, we want to work with China and help China as well. Now, an update from earlier today, big shout out to Crypto R Us for this. DCENT proposes tariff pause to ease China rare earth curbs. New Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent proposes extending the U.S.-China tariff pause in exchange for China delaying its rare earth export curbs by 6+ months. Rare earths are critical for high-tech industries, and this move aims to ease trade tensions while protecting global supply chains. If this happens, okay, if we see an announcement around this, I want to go back to this. Any negative news, the market is extremely reactive to. Any positive news, the market will be extremely reactive to. If we see a pause for 6 months around these tariff and trade war discussions, we will see the markets bounce back in a massive way. We already have an example of what the markets would do if we see this happen, because we saw it happen from back in April to where we are currently at. Quickly, the markets rose from April to just recently over 39+%. The total as well, looking at this on the weekly, here we have April. If we're looking at this logically, the market should continue to rally if we see that positive update from Bessent, because the total even jumped 84+%. So we are watching what the Trump admin is putting out and what's happening with this China situation, because any positive update, the markets are going to eat it up. This is also at a time where retail focus on crypto is plummeting. We have over here from Kalshi breaking, searches for buy Bitcoin have not reached the highs of 2017 and 2021. Has the bull market even started? And a lot of people think that the bull run hasn't started, that we could still have, a year or two left. Obviously, I'm kind of on the fence with this because of obvious reasons, but I will say, yeah, it does feel as if retail just doesn't care about crypto. But do you blame them? I mean, at this point, we've been chopping for quite some time on a lot of these altcoin charts. I mean, XRP is the outlier here. However, looking at like XLM, for an example, because I just talked about this recently. XLM has been chopping to the side in a downtrend since going all the way back to November. We're coming up on 1 whole year since XLM has done anything. So retail focus right now is definitely at like all-time lows, because again, retail just simply does not care because the market has been boring. It's been frustrating. It's been, negative essentially. So until we start to see a big update with this US and China situation, markets are probably going to be a little bit more boring. We will probably chop a bit more. But the second that we see bullish news around this, or, good news, the market is going to go crazy, just like back in April. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because of more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, this has been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out, guys.